Today's lesson is Braille, a revolutionary system for reading and writing. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Helen.
Today we're going to continue talking about Braille, which is a system for reading and writing for blind people. Before that, we had a couple of other systems. At least there was a system at that institute or that establishment in Paris. But we're also talking about the work of Mr. Barbier, Charles Barbier, who came up with this system for Braille later on.
Yes, the system used raised dots, and these raised dots corresponded to a grid that was 6 by 5 in size. And it was considered revolutionary because it really helped blind people read and also write. The problem with Hoy's invention, the invention of reading with raised type, was that students could not reproduce the type. They were not able to make their own raised type and write in that way.
Okay, so we've got raised type invented by Valentin Hoy. Then we've got Charles Barbier with his system based on the Polybius square. And today we're actually going to tell you about Mr. Braille, and we'll do that right now. So let's dig into our lesson now. Let's listen to the first part, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
Among the students at the Institute was a young boy named Louis Braille, who was astonished when he first touched the raised dots of Barbier's writing system. Braille immediately identified its merits, but he was also quick to notice the system's flaws. Most importantly, the dots making up each cell could not be felt all at once with the fingertip, so reading was a slow process. The system also lacked symbols for punctuation, mathematics, and musical notation.
各位好，第一部分我们看到名词 fingertip， 指指尖。例如 Janice is tall enough that she can just touch the ceiling with her fingertips. Janice 长得够高，她的指尖刚好可以碰到天花板。或是 A petal fell on my fingertips. 一片花瓣落在我的指尖。另外补充一个含有 fingertip 在内的片语 at one's fingertips， 意思是随手可得，像是Computers place a world of information at our fingertips. 电脑让我们随手可得大量的资讯。也可以说 Blake has all the information necessary at his fingertips to write the essay. Blake 手边有所有用来写论文需要的资讯。再补充 fingertip 中的单字 tip, T-I-P, tip. 这个名词指尖端或是顶端。我们可以说The painter dipped the tip of her brush into paint. 那位画家将他的画笔笔尖浸入颜料中。或者 Jackie sticks out the tip of her tongue when she is thinking. Jackie 思索的时候就会伸出舌尖。
So Barbier took his system for reading and writing to the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris. Now, among the students at the institute was a young boy named Louis Braille, who was astonished when he first touched the raised dots of Barbier's writing system. So again, Louis Braille was one of the blind students at the institute in Paris. And when he first touched the raised dots of Barbier's system, he was astonished. To be astonished means to be very surprised, to be shocked.
Indeed, to be extremely shocked, to be very, very surprised. Wow, that is so cool. I can feel these raised dots of this writing system. What a revolutionary system of writing for blind people. But Braille immediately identified its merits, but he was also quick to notice the system's flaws. Okay, so again, this is a work in progress, okay? It goes through several different versions until we get a final version. And yes, he thought this was really great. He identified its merits. To identify means to recognize something, to recognize that something exists. You might want to identify yourself. If somebody asks you who you are, please identify yourself. Tell me who you are, what's your name, etc., etc. But in this particular particular case, he identified its merits. Merits are the good points, the strong points.
Right. So he identified the merits of this writing system, which are the good points, the positives, but he was also quick to notice the system's flaws. So the opposite of merit is flaw. A flaw is a mistake or a fault in something. You can talk about the flaw of somebody's character. A person might have the flaw of being lazy or of being too greedy or jealous. These are traditionally considered character flaws.
Indeed. So, yes, we might all have flaws indeed. As you said, some people are lazy. Maybe some people are too pushy or whatever. These might be flaws. And he also noticed the flaws in the system. Yes, it works pretty good, but there are some problems here. Like when I come across this letter, it's kind of difficult to identify, and it's hard to tell when one word starts and another one begins or whatever. He just noticed that there were some flaws that could be ironed out. You could get rid of those flaws. And most importantly, the dots making up each cell could not be felt all at once with the fingertip. So reading was a slow process. So that, of course, is an example of a flaw, perhaps the most important flaw. Most importantly, the dots that made up each cell could not all be felt at once. That's a big problem.
Right. So here, they could not be felt at once, referring to the dots. At once means at one time, at the same time. So one of the problems with Barbier's system was that it took a long time for the reader to identify each word because the fingertip is only so big and you need to fit a lot of information so that the fingertip can read it all at once. So reading was a slow process because of this problem.
Yep, your fingertip, of course, is the end of your finger, the underside or the opposite side to your fingernail. That's your fingertip, or at least the very end of it there. And so, of course, you could not touch it all at the same time. You could not touch it all at once. So, of course, it was quite slow to read things. The system also lacked symbols for punctuation, mathematics, and musical notation. So I guess the original system had symbols for letters, but not for punctuation. Punctuation, of course, refers to little lines and dots and things that we add to our language to let people know when to stop, when to pause, etc., etc. A period, quotation marks, etc. Those are examples of punctuation.
Yes, even though they're very tiny, they are important for letting people make sense of what they read or write, where one sentence begins and another ends. So Barbier's system did not have symbols for punctuation. It did not have symbols for math or musical notation. So when we talk about musical notation, we're referring to the notes that are written to indicate the keys on a piano or the notes in a musical instrument that musicians read when they play a musical instrument.
Right, and notation is just simply the process of noting things, writing things down in symbols, and musical notation would include like the treble clef, the bass clef, the sharp sign, the flat sign, etc., etc. Those would all be symbols used in music or musical notation. All right, let's continue now with the second part and talk some more about some improvements to this writing system for the blind.
Braille improved on Barbier's system in the following years, modifying it until he arrived at a simplified 6-dot system. The number and arrangement of raised dots in Braille's cells could represent any letter of the alphabet in a space no larger than a fingertip. With 64 possible combinations, the cells could also represent various symbols. In 1824, when he was only 15 years old, Braille unveiled this system. Then, in 1829, he published his first book on what is known today as Braille.
第二部分我们看到单字 simplify 这个字是动词，意思是简化或是精简。举例来说 Jack simplified his writing to make it easier to understand. Jack 把写法简化，让人比较好懂。或是 The language in this report is very complicated. Can we simplify it? 这篇报告的用字非常复杂，我们可以简化它吗？另外补充这个字的形容词 simple， S-I-M-P-L-E simple 表示简单的。例如 That's a simple math problem, but I didn't understand it. 那是个简单的数学题，但我搞不懂。也可以说 This game is not simple to play. 这个游戏不容易玩。最后我们看到动词 unveil， 指公布、推出或是为点点点揭幕。例如 The company unveiled plans to open a new European headquarters. 该公司公布开设欧洲新总部的计划。或是 The chef unveiled his new dessert creation at the banquet. 主厨在那场宴席中首次推出他的新式创作甜点。另外补充这个字的同义字 reveal， R-E-V-E-A-L reveal， 这个动词意思是揭晓或是揭露，像是 Nikki had a big smile on her face after the judge revealed the name of the winner. 当裁判揭晓获胜者姓名时， Nikki 脸上有着大大的微笑。也可以说The policeman said he would not stop working until he revealed the truth. 那位员警说，在揭露真相之前，他不会停止工作。
So in the last part, Louis Braille, we saw that he was astonished when he first touched Barbier's writing system, but he also quickly identified its merits and flaws. Now, Braille improved on Barbier's system in the following years, modifying it until he arrived at a simplified 6-dot system. So over the following years, he modified Barbier's system. To modify something means to change that thing. Usually to change it slightly, to make some improvements here and there. And so that's what he did to Barbier's system. And he did it until he arrived at a simplified 6-dot system. To arrive at means to come to a conclusion, to produce something that you want. And this something was a system that was much simpler than Barbier's system.
Indeed. So he arrived at this simplified 6-dot system. To arrive at means to actually get someplace physically. We will arrive at Kaohsiung in the afternoon, or you could say arrive in if you're talking about a big city. But here to arrive at just means he finally reached this accomplishment in his process. He arrived at a simplified 6-dot system. So it was kind of complicated before, and now it's simpler, or it's simplified. Of course, the most common example of something being simplified would be Chinese writing. In China, they use simplified writing, simplified characters, whereas Hong Kong and Taiwan, they still use the traditional characters.
The number and arrangement of raised dots in Braille cells could represent any letter of the alphabet in a space no longer than a fingertip. So we saw before that one of the flaws of Barbier's system was that it took a long time to read because the dots could not be felt at one time with the fingertip. But with Braille's system, the alphabet or any letter of the alphabet was so small, or the dots fit in a space that was so small that they could be felt with the fingertip at one time.
Okay, so if you've got small fingers, hopefully you can cover those dots and read what is written there. And with 64 possible combinations, the cells could also represent various symbols. So that's a lot of combinations there. We've got 64 possible combinations. We can't do every symbol out there, but that does include the 26 letters of the alphabet, at least if we're talking about English. And it could also include other symbols like the exclamation point or the question mark. Those are symbols of punctuation. And then also musical notation, amongst other things.
Yep. So in 1824, when he was only 15 years old, Braille unveiled this system. So he was very young when he came up with this system. He was only 15. And he unveiled it when he was finished making it up. To unveil something means to officially announce something, to officially show the world what you've done, or to officially tell the world a piece of news that has been kept secret under the cover until then.
Right. This is quite amazing for a 15-year-old boy. Charles Braille unveiled his system. He let everybody know about it. Then in the year 1829, he published his first book on what is known today as Braille. Okay, so you might find that in a museum someplace, the first book that is written in Braille. And indeed, it was probably revolutionary for blind people. They thought, wow, I can finally read the classics. They are now written in a system I can understand. Of course, there's probably going to be a learning curve there because it will probably take some time to learn how to read those things. But if you watch blind people reading Braille, ooh, they're probably flying over the page really, really fast.
Yes, so this was indeed an amazing accomplishment, and he published this book in 1829. But as we will see, people won't be using this book until a bit later than that.
True. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final part. We'll listen to it first, and then we will discuss it.
Despite its success, Braille wasn't adopted in France as the official communications system for blind people until 1854, 2 years after Braille's death. Today, it is the most used tactile writing system in the world. Thanks to Louis Braille, blind people all over the world are able to read books, magazines, and even articles like this one.
Despite its success, Braille wasn't adopted in France as the official communication system for blind people until 1854, 2 years after Braille's death. So Braille came up with the system in 1824, and then 5 years later, he wrote a book about it. And then it wasn't until 1854, that's approximately 25 years later, that Braille became the official communication system for blind people in France. And unfortunately, Braille wasn't even able to see it because this happened 2 years after he died.
Now, this sentence begins with the word despite. That tells us that something negative is going to happen. Despite something being the case, something else happened instead. So we were expecting one thing, but we got something else instead. So despite its success, even though it was successful, Braille wasn't adopted in France as the official communication system for blind people until later. But it only took a couple of years there, so that seems relatively quickly. Sometimes it takes lots of new ideas, or many new ideas, many years to become adopted in the country or by the government.
Yes, and today it is the most used tactile writing system in the world. So Braille has become the most used writing system in the world, but of course we're not talking about the usual writing system. We're talking about a tactile writing system. Tactile means relating to the sense of touch. So we have 5 senses, and tactile is the adjective that relates to the sense of touch. Audio is related to the sense of hearing, visual to the sense of seeing or sight, and you also have olfactory that's related to the sense of smell, and so on.
I should mention that the word tactile can be pronounced both tactile and tactile. Personally, I prefer tactile, but tactile is equally correct.
Yes, so thanks to Louis Braille, blind people all over the world are able to read books, magazines, and even articles like this one.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第3部分的第一句有提到，直到1854年，盲文才被选定为法国盲人的官方通信系统。那这边我们是要介绍 until 的用法。 until 它表示直到点点点，直到什么什么为止，它可以当介系词，那后面就是接表示时间点的名词，那么也可以当连接词，后面就是接子句了。当我们用 not until 什么，这是表达直到什么什么才开始怎么样，这是用来指说情况一直到某个时间点后才改变哦。举例来说 She didn't go to bed until her parents came home. 直到爸妈回到家，她才去上床睡觉。那另外我们也可以把这个句中的 not 跟 until 移到句首，那这时候主要子句就必须倒装了，也就是要把 be 动词或助动词摆到主词的前方，句型就会是Not until 再加上你要表达时间点的名词或子句，然后再搭配倒装的主要子句，也就是 be 动词加主词，或者是助动词加主词加动词。举例来说 He wasn't able to get off work until 9 p.m. 好，那我们把句子里面这个 wasn't 这当中的这个 not 抽出来，然后再把后面的 until 9 p.m. 抽出来，我们把 not until 9 p.m. 移到句首，就会写作 Not until 9 p.m. was he able to get off work. 直到晚上9点他才下班。注意到我们的 be 动词 was 是摆在主词 he 的前面。好，再看个例句哦。You cannot watch TV until you finish your homework. 现在我们把 not 跟 until you finish your homework 移到句首之后，就会写作 Not until you finish your homework can you watch TV. 我们把 can 移到主词前面形成倒装咯。那这个句子的意思就是说，直到你把功课写完，你才能看电视哦。我们同样在课文第3部分有一个补充单字 tactile， 或是也有人念作 tactile T-A-C-T-I-L-E。 我们来学它的字根，看到 T-A-C-T 或者是 T-A-N-G 或者是 T-A-G 这一类字根，它有 touch 或是 handle 的意思，表示触摸、接触、操作或是管理。那么在 tactile 这个字当中呢，它的字根 T-A-C-T 表示触碰， I-L-E 是形容词字尾，把它合在一起 tactile 就是形容触觉的。我们也来补充几个有这一类字根的单字。第一个是 intact， 它的字首 I-N 表示否定， T-A-C-T 表示触碰。那没有被触碰过，就可以联想到它是完好无缺的，未受损的，所以 intact 就是形容完整无缺的，完好如初的，或是未受损伤的。那第二个补充的是 tangible T-A-N-G-I-B-L-E， 那它的字根 T-A-N-G 表示触摸， I-B-L-E 就像 A-B-L-E 可以表达可怎么样的，那么可触摸的，可以摸得到的，应该很容易联想到 tangible 表示可触摸的，有形的或是真实的。第三个补充的是 contagious， 它的字首 C-O-N 表示一起，字根 T-A-G 表示接触，那么 O-U-S 是形容词字尾。大家应该对保持社交距离再熟悉不过了，那如果是一起接触，就会很容易把疾病散播出去嘛。我们 contagious 就可以形容疾病它是具接触传染性的，也可以形容它是具有感染力的。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Astonished. We were astonished to learn how much money he made. Identify. The mechanic quickly identified the problem and gave us a quote for the repair. Merit. The plan has its merits, but it's too dangerous. Flaw. Even a child could point out the flaw in that argument. Modify. Paul modified his motorcycle, making it lighter and faster. Simplify. Can you simplify this textbook for use in high schools? Unveil. The company unveiled its newest smartphone at last week's conference.
Discussion Starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter. And the question is, in your opinion, did Barbier or Braille make the biggest contribution to developing a reading and writing system for people with blindness, and why?
Actually, I think both contributions were equally important, since a lot of the most important inventions in civilization didn't come from one person. It's usually one person who came up with the initial idea and another person or other people who improved that idea so that we can have what we have today.
Well, I think Barbier's contribution was the most important because, after all, if he had not done what he did, then Braille would not have come up with his own idea. And of course, we always hear the phrase to build on the work of others, to stand on the shoulders of giants. So indeed, I think Barbier was more important than Braille. Or even going back to Mr. Hoy there, with the raised text there, that invention got things started. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.